around building web applications and integrations. So integrations is what brings me joy at the end of the day. And I'm happy to share a little bit of knowledge about how that can help us in the Pardot ecosystem. I want to cover a little bit about how a lot of people think about the Pardot and Salesforce sync today. I want to do a little bit of an intro into external actions, talk about some use cases and how we've used the Pardot sync in order to accomplish some of the automations that are common out there. And then, I'll actually get into setting up the external actions. We'll get into the nitty gritty. I'm going to try to have a balance of that, really technical details with, a little bit of a higher level on how you can just use it if it's already been set up. A little bit of a demo. We'll see if it works, and then talk about some best practices and tips. So covering a little bit of the foundations here, right? Pardot and Salesforce in the back end, they are two different systems, right? They're presented as one. Salesforce has done a lot of great work in making sure that it all feels like you're in one happy system. But behind the scenes, it really is two, right? There's two different databases, which is why there's the sync in the first place, right? We have to copy the data from Pardot on the prospect records. We have to copy that into Salesforce and vice versa. Now, the direction that data gets copied will be different depending on the type of objects, right? Prospects will sync back and forth to leads and contacts. Campaign member actions that happen in Pardot will happen in Salesforce and vice versa. And there's a bunch of other objects where it's unidirectional, meaning the sync only happens from Salesforce and the data gets pushed into Pardot, allowing you to use it in your segmentation and all the other fancy stuff we all know and love that we can do. Now, I've got a couple examples here on screen. If there's other things that you try to do, some crazy automations that you're using the Pardot sync for today, I would love to see that in chat. All right, so maybe I can enhance this screen the next time I give this presentation. But some of the examples that I have come across usually relate around creating a Salesforce record, right? Maybe that's a task, right, where we want to have full control over the subject, the details, dates, right? Where we might want to try to perform calculations, right? Pardot sucks at math. I think Mike Cruiser has said that a lot. But yeah, it doesn't do math at all. So if you want to, you have to schlep that data over to Salesforce, let Salesforce do math, and then sync it back. You can use the sync to basically, in a roundabout way, integrate Pardot with another system, right? So imagine you want to place that prospect in a sales cadence in some other tool, right? You got to flow it through Salesforce, because most of those tools integrate well with Salesforce, and Pardot doesn't always get that love. So that's something that we've been using the sync for back and forth. Same thing with notifications, right? So there's a bunch of different reasons that we have had to rely on the sync to date in order to do something that Pardot can't do natively. Again, if you've got some examples, I'd love to see it in chat. I know chat's pretty quiet. Hopefully I haven't put you all to sleep already. But some of the limitations of taking advantage of that sync capability is that you have to worry about delays, right? The sync isn't always immediate, although there's a couple use cases where it is. But in general, you might have to wait between 2 to 10 minutes for data to go from Pardot to Salesforce and for it to come back, right? There's just queuing. There's a bunch of reasons, but there's delays there, right? And sometimes that can throw you for a loop if you're not really used to it. Sync conflict, right? The Pardot admin's most favorite task every day is to check this out. But anytime there's a sync conflict, how's that impacting your sync-based automations, right? Especially if there's, multiple changes that are happening while the sync conflict is in place. That can really throw things for a loop. If there's anything around complex data structures, right? If we're mapping fields, if there's relationships, right? Pardot works really well when the data is like just stamped on the prospect record. But anything you get more complicated than that, the trying to sync it back and forth and work with the data, it gets really tough, and it's not always an easy thing to solve. And then we have distributed configuration, right? We have field configuration in two systems, right? We have our Pardot custom field for supporting the automation. Then we have fields on the contact and lead record, right? And we might have automations in two different systems, right? Where part of the automation is in Pardot that we can do, and then part of the automation that we can't is in Salesforce, right? So having that spread all over the place can, just add to that, at least adding to the cognitive complexity, if not in other places. So there's a couple new Pardot features. And when I say new, it's been around for, 2 to 3 years. External activities was announced in 2021, and this is a good way to get data into Pardot, right? Now you can only push one value per record. So there's, you really need to think about how you're going to take advantage of that external activity, but it can be pretty helpful. Using external activities does need you to know how to use APIs. Now, not necessarily coding, but if you have powerful declarative options for working with APIs, that's good. If not, then coding might be needed. Now, an external activity can be used as a webhook endpoint, right? So if you're working with a system that has webhooks, you might be able to point that webhook at the external activity to get data into Pardot. And there's some very limited ways that you can take advantage of those external activity records once they're inside Pardot already. So that's just one way to get data in. Again, that's been around for like 3 years. But the more interesting thing, at least in my opinion, is external actions. External actions came out about, 9 months afterwards. It came out in 2022. And it's a good way to get data outside of Pardot, right? So you have something inside Pardot, you want to take action on it somewhere else, you can kind of push that out. Setting up external actions does not require any coding. And I'll try to show that in the demo today, but you don't need to know Apex. You don't need to know coding at all. Now, having said that, if you want to do some coding, you absolutely can, but it's not something that's needed. And it does give you some pretty robust automation capabilities. In Pardot, you can use it as a completion action on forms and form handlers. You can put it inside an engagement studio program. So it's a really cool thing. Oh, I do want to call out that both of these features are only available in Plus, Advanced, and Premium editions of Pardot. So those are I keep wanting to say new editions, but again, those have also been out for like 3 or 4 years. So if you're on an edition that's even older than that, then you won't be able to take advantage of this. But for everyone else, I think these are pretty cool. Now, I want to take a little bit of a detour because I threw out terms like APIs and webhooks, and it might not be entirely clear what those things are. An API is something that you can make a request to, right? So I want to make a request to Pardot. I will use Pardot's API. Now, it can be Salesforce's API. It doesn't matter. But as an example, if I'm using Salesforce's API, whether it's me or code that I wrote or an automation I created, I am choosing to start the conversation by saying, who is contact X? Or I want to update contact X to have some other values, right? With an API, I am in control of when the communication happens. With APIs, I can just retrieve information, right? I can also send updates, or like I can create records, I can delete records. So it's a little bit more action based. Now, with a lot of APIs, you can get a list or a menu of many commands that you can issue, right? For the Salesforce example, I can get a list of, what objects I can work with. I can get a list of, what settings I might be able to change, right? It allows you to sometimes self-discover what the API has available to you. Often that's presented in terms of user documentation, but sometimes the API itself will allow you to ask questions about it. It's kind of a mind bend, but it's cool. But again, with an API, you are 100% in control of when those requests are made, right? If you don't send an update, nothing's going to happen. Webhooks, on the other hand, it's a command or an order that a company gives you. A good example, I think, is when you make payments, right? So let's say you use PayPal or Stripe or some kind of payment provider, right? When a payment is made, that company is going to just send you a piece of information saying, hey, Ben made a payment of $50. You go handle that however you want. Right. So with webhooks, you're mostly just receiving information. You're receiving those orders, right? And it happens around some sort of action that occurs in that other system. Salesforce has the same capability where if a contact record is updated, we could set up the equivalent of a webhook so that Salesforce will push that information out. Now, usually you ask that other system to send you a webhook. They don't just do it, without consent, so to speak. And sometimes you can even configure or tell that system, hey, when a payment is made, I want to know, these 3 or 4 things. I don't want the whole list of data attributes. I'm only interested in 5 of the 73 that I can have. So sometimes those webhooks will let you tailor what's coming out. But again, with webhooks, that other company decides when to send information to you. Now, hopefully this little diagram kind of helps, right? With the API, again, hey, Salesforce, is there any new information that you can give me? Or, hey, Salesforce, go update this prospect. And then, Salesforce or in the diagram, the gear here, right? It's going to, chew away, it'll process it, and then it'll say, here you go, here's your answer. Whether it's here's the list of contacts that meet your search criteria, or maybe it's just, yes, I was able to update the record successfully. Now with webhooks, again, it's just the gear or the system, Salesforce or whatever, pushing information out to you saying, hey, here's new data that you need to figure out what to do with. Now, taking that concept and taking it away from the technical side, right? Imagine you're, working with a restaurant. Right? When we're thinking about restaurants and APIs, right, you can ask the server for a menu and then they will give you the list of today's dishes, right? You can order a bottle of wine and then they will somehow, we don't necessarily know what they're doing when they walk away and they go into the cellar and they try to find it, right? Those are details that we don't really necessarily care about. We just know that we've ordered something and we're going to get it back. So I got a couple examples there. Now, when we think of restaurants as webhooks, right, just you might have given the restaurant your email address, whether it's browsing on the internet or, doing an online order. But once that's done, right, when we're thinking of webhooks, maybe a couple days from now, they're going to just send us a special order email, a special offer, I'm sorry, right? They might give us a table is ready notification. Right. So those are hopefully ways that help us understand the differences between APIs and webhooks. Now, when we're thinking of external actions, right? We can kind of think of them as both webhook and API, right? Where the event might be someone filling out a form or something like that, right? We define the external action webhook side of things by saying, what information is Pardot going to throw at us? And then on the Salesforce side, we define how we're going to, catch or receive that information and then process it. So because we're catching and, or receiving that information inside of Salesforce, well, anything that Salesforce can do, we can do here as well. And what I really love is you don't need to have the prospect synced into Salesforce at all, right? You can have Pardot call an external action, even though the record has never synced. And we'll show that. Now, because we don't have to sync it, we don't have to have all of those extra fields inside of Salesforce polluting our lead and contact object, or technical debt, as lots of people like to say. We don't need to have that anymore, right? It can be a little bit cleaner. We can call Apex, or we can call flows directly from Pardot. That's essentially what we're doing. And I really recommend that you always have Pardot call that auto launched flow, because it gives you good ways of debugging and testing. It's really powerful. Now there's, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's
Hey Adam. Sorry, there was a question in comments that is pretty involved. That if you want to take a skim of it real quick, because it does pertain to the syncing, and whether an external action might be able to solve for it. Would you mind heading over to the chat to read it out?
Yeah, I saw the question came in, and it needs a lot of focus and thinking.
Basically, so the idea is that they've got a so there's a BU with duplicate contacts with the same email address that exists in the CRM on purpose. They have different account managers in different divisions of the business unit who settle the same customer base. This is actually a problem that I've encountered several times, because it deviates from the standard process where you've got where it's a more linear one account owner, one account manager selling everything to that one person, when in reality you have enterprises where you've got account manager for product A, account manager for product B, and account manager for product C, and they each want to be able to treat and triage leads that may already exist, but they need to treat them as a lead for their product base for what they're selling. And I don't know if that's something that you've ever encountered or kind of thought through, but is there any? So the challenging is that when a form submission is made and the customer submits a form and hasn't been cookied, Pardot will sync the record with most recent activity. We'll also notify the correct account manager by using some value from the form, field or hidden, that tells the correct account manager to notify. Is there any kind of external action functionality for the sync that might solve for this? And I realize that's probably a pretty deep question, but just at a kind of at the highest level, is there potential, at the very least, in your mind for that to be something that an external action could potentially solve for?
So at the highest level, the answer is no. And then I know Andy won't be happy with that answer.
Fair enough.
I will go just a little bit one step deeper. And the reason that it's a no is that external actions will happen after the prospect record is either created or, linked to an existing one, right? So the challenge in the written chat post here is that Pardot on the form submission itself, right? The first thing Pardot's going to do is try to either find that existing prospect or create another one. Once the data from the form has been written to that prospect record, again, either new or existing, then it will start firing those completion actions, right? So external action execution happens a little too late in the life cycle for this to really help.
So I have I call it kind of a galaxy brain question, where it's just kind of like a tinfoil hat idea of like, is there a scenario where you could set your entire org to, like, if you have this problem continually, where you basically forego almost entirely the CRM sync functionality for your prospects, and then create essentially a custom integration using external actions. So you're not syncing to a specific record. It's effectively a Pardot only record, but you're able to then take that action and then roll it into Salesforce, for Salesforce to then, and then building automation in Salesforce to recognize, based on field value, which record that should be tied to. So instead of enabling that default functionality, you saying don't sync at all as to leader contacts, and instead just go over top and build a custom integration, and then you would have a lot more flexibility in Salesforce to be able to build flows and such. Say, if this criteria is this and this, then notify this person. I don't know. That's just kind of a galaxy brain idea, but I don't know if there's any juice there.
Yeah, if the intent is to truly have multiple prospects with the same email address tied to different cookies or Pardot visitors, right? There's probably a way you could use external actions to call your auto-launched flow and then have the auto-launched flow create a brand new prospect and then tell Pardot to move the visitor association from the old prospect to the new one, right? That would probably work, but there's probably a bunch of downstream end user experiences that are gonna like mess that up.
Okay, that's fair. I was just curious, because I mean, this thing that Andy said, I've had probably 4 or 5 clients over the years that have had this same problem of like, well, I've got 6 different sales teams that are not related to each other, and but we all sell to the same group, and they want to be able to go through the lead qualification process on their own for the product that they're responsible for, instead of having to operate off of a contact that someone else technically owns.
Yeah.
So
now Justin also added a good addition to this particular rabbit hole, so to speak. And yes, you can use an external action to, again, call that flow and have the flow either update the account with some details, right? Assuming the form is specifically for that. You could also have that external action send a very specific notification saying, hey, Bob is trying to do this, go talk to him or whatever. So there's a few different ways we might be able to work around some of these limitations. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to try to climb back out of that rabbit hole and go through some of the limitations, right? And we covered one just now really in depth, right? External actions aren't going to be that silver bullet that's going to solve everything, but it does give us some interesting capabilities on, trying to work around either Pardot limitations itself or, anything else that we want to try to tackle. Another thing I want to caution people on is, if you're going to go on Google and, start searching out external actions, there is a lot of incorrect information out there in the ecosystem. Some of it, I think, is because external activities and external actions, like they've got relatively similar names, right? And for people who aren't that technical, they might, on the surface sound like the same thing. So there's a lot of articles out there that are talking about external activities in the details, but they're calling it actions and vice versa. So just beware if you're out there trying to Google and get additional information. There is also something around the data types itself, right? So external actions only support two different data types, right? And that's text and number. So, if you have dates and date times, right, it can still work in a way, but it gets carried over as just plain text, and then you have to parse it and you have to work with it. So, it's again not that silver bullet that's, going to solve everything, but I still think it's a really powerful tool. So I want to go through a couple of comparisons, right? So imagine you want to stamp a prospect with a random number. Use cases behind that is if you want to try to do, pseudo A/B testing in an engagement studio program, or you just want to have a random sampling of prospects for your dynamic list, right? Having that random number on a prospect record is pretty good. Now, the typical design prior to external actions that you would have is you might have your random number field on your prospect. In Salesforce, you'd have two different custom fields for the random number, one on contact, one on lead. You would have two different record triggered flows, again, one on the contact, one on the lead, where it stamps a random number on the Salesforce field. And you can kind of anticipate having a 5 to 10 minute turnaround time from the prospect record being created, flowing through the systems, automation happening in Salesforce, and then the data flowing back into Pardot. Now, if we were to take that same use case of having a random number and go with the external action approach, right, we would still have to have that new prospect field on the prospect to hold the random number. We would have a single Salesforce auto-launched flow where we take the prospect ID as a input value. The flow would create the random number, and then the flow would call Pardot's API to directly update the prospect. Now, in the external action, it's a little bit of configuration that's needed. You can use the HML merge fields when you're setting that up, and you can have it automatically set the prospect ID. So when a marketer is going to use this external action, they don't have to type it in. And no input is really required from them as they're using it. With this approach, you can expect a 2 to 5 second turnaround time from the prospect record getting created, the completion action being called, and then data flowing back into Pardot with that random number. Another use case is, saving a form submission, right? If someone fills out a form and then fills it out again 1 or 2 minutes later, in Pardot, you're not really there isn't really anywhere to see, hey, here's submission number 1 with all the details. Here's submission number 2 with all the details, right? When you're looking at the prospect record, you just see the latest results. Now, yes, you can go into the audit tab and see what's going on there, but that's really messy. So a pattern has been, create a custom object in Salesforce specifically for storing each form submission, and then sync all of that data over, similar to the random number, right? You have all these different custom fields on the lead and contact. You have record triggered flows for the lead and contact where it's trying to copy all this data around. So, it gets a little bit messy, and it's tough to, follow all the dots. I'm going to take a quick pause here. Brittany, yes, the slides are going to be available. And Ben, I believe you record these and share the recording later, so you'll have both.
Yes. Yeah, this is being recorded, and it'll. I'm going to share the recording via email and also post it online.
Cool. Now, thinking about that same thing without the, leaning on the sync mechanism, right? In Salesforce, we would still have that custom object to store all the information for each submission. The auto-launched flow is going to receive the individual fields from Pardot, and it's just going to create the record, right? No need to create a contact or a lead. So it's again, a nice way of separating the two. And then similar to the random number, right? The external action can present inputs specifically for the flow, and we can still use HTML merge fields. So for both of these examples, what I like is we don't have to pollute the contact and lead object with all those extra custom fields. We only have one flow instead of the two that we have to manage and maintain. And yeah, it's just a lot cleaner. All right, so let's say someone in this group is sold, right? And we're on board. We want to take this approach. How do we start configuring Salesforce, and how do we technically start to implement this? So the first thing that we would do is inside of Salesforce setup or marketing setup, you would look for marketing app extensions, right? Then once you're there, you can go and you can click the new button, just like any other record. You click on new, and then you make a new app extension. Now, marketing app extensions are really a collection of external activities and external actions. So what you really want to think about is, for the name here, think of the company that you're building these external actions for, right? If it's for your internal org and some automations that you are creating yourself, right? Just name the extension, Acme Corporation, and then you'll be good to go. There's a limitation here where you can only have 10 marketing app extensions, and you can't delete them. So just be a little bit mindful as you're creating them, and don't go nuts with a whole bunch of different tests. Now, once you've created that extension, the next thing you're going to want to do is enable your Pardot business unit or units to be able to see the actions and the activities that we're going to create. So you click on the new for a new business unit assignment. You kind of have to type the business unit name, which is not a great user experience. It doesn't click on it and it show you. It won't show you until you start typing. So it's only something we have to do once. Not that big of a deal. But you get your business unit name in there, you have it assigned, and then you can start by either creating an action or an activity. So that's what we're going to try to do here today. Here I have a Pardot form. I just call it high interest. It doesn't have anything fancy here, just your typical name, company email, and comments. But what I want to do is when someone fills out this form, I want to have that random number stamped on the prospect. So I have already set up the external action. I've set up the flow. We'll get there in a moment. But as a marketer, my experience in using an external action that has been created, that's what we're going to demo here. So on this form, we will go to completion actions. If you scroll down here to your completion actions, you can add a new one. And one of the options here is going to be execute external action. Once you've done that, what's going to happen very quickly behind the scenes, Pardot is asking Salesforce, hey, what actions do I have available? Still seeing the slides. That's weird because, all right. Andy says we can see Pardot. Justin says we can see Pardot. Okay. If you still see the slides, I don't know why, but maybe refresh your Trailblazer community groups screen. I'm gonna keep going. Hopefully you guys can get that resolved. So yeah, completion actions, we've selected the execute external action, and here I can pick, generate random numbers. Next thing that happens is Pardot's gonna look at the configuration. It's gonna say, hey, what values or variables do I need to prompt the marketer for? And in this case, it's prompting me for the prospect ID. And all it has here pre-populated is the HTML merge value for the recipient ID. Now imagine you're asking for names, or you're asking for favorite color, or things like that. That's where you'd really want to use the HTML merge fields to take those values from the form itself, or sorry, from the prospect, which is populated by the form. All right, we're going to confirm and save this. And then we're going to go to this awesomely designed form. And I'm going to put some kind of comment in here. Go Bears. All right, I'm going to hit contact me now. All right, so this is submitting the form. And what should be happening behind the scenes is that random number should be called. And assuming this demo works, it hasn't yet, it should pop up here with the random numbers. I gotta love a demo that blows up in your face, right? All right. Let's go look at the configuration, and maybe I can quickly see where I screwed up. All right. Here's the auto launched flow. This is what the external action is calling. And what we have here as variables is the prospect ID that's coming in. And we have a couple of extra variables here, which I added without updating something else, and that's why things broke, where I can effectively ask the marketer, what's the minimum number and the maximum number for that random number that's going to get generated. So the idea here is anything you want to receive from Pardot, they're going to need to be variables that are available for input. Okay. Once we have those variables, then we can take whatever action we want. We can do whatever we want. In our example, we're generating a random number, and this is calling a little piece of Apex, which I'll show in a moment. We pass it the maximum and the minimum. Once that has been done, what we do is we have another action here for updating the prospect. And this is calling the Pardot API directly. And that's what allows us to bypass the sync, right? So data's coming in over that external action through the input variables. We're doing crunching, we're doing whatever processing we want, and then we call the Pardot API to push whatever information we want to go back onto the prospect. Taking just a brief deep dive into the code, here's the random number generation action class that I wrote. It took like 10 minutes to write. These things can be pretty simple. We have the request, which is what we're asking from the flow designer, and that's where we have the minimum and the maximum values. We have the response, where we populate two different random numbers, and that's what a flow designer can choose to use, to either stamp it on Pardot or stamp it somewhere else inside of Salesforce if they want. And then we have, some code here that actually generates that random number and make sure it's between the minimum and the maximum. Pretty simple stuff. Something similar for updating the prospect in Pardot, right? We need the prospect ID and the two random numbers. And then we make a HTTP call, or this is where we make that API call. We're using the named credential for, passwords and secrets and keys and stuff like that. And basically we have code here that builds that Pardot API call, sends it over, and then we're good and done. All right, so let's get out of this flow, which blew up in my face because I made a change without testing it at the last minute. And we're going to go to our account engagement, and we're going to take a look at the marketing app extensions. And we're going to take a look at the generate random numbers. Now in here, we have a bunch of information. We have the name that we want it to appear inside of Pardot. We have this blob of JSON, And if I come in here and edit it, it gives it a little bit of indenting and formatting, which makes it a little bit easier to read for those who haven't. And you can see here that this only has the prospect ID and nothing else, right? So because I made a change to the flow and I didn't come in here and like sync this information, that's why things didn't work going back and forth. So to fix that, what I can do, I'm just making this up on the fly, so hopefully it doesn't blow up on me twice in the same demo, is I want to look for the random number generation. And then we can see that it refreshed this and it added our 2 extra variables. I can still come in here and put my HTML merge where I'm doing the recipient.id. And we're going to keep the rest of these here. So this is the 3 input variables that our auto launch flow is asking for. We're providing a default value for the prospect ID. Now, if I scroll down a little bit and I look at this view section, this is what tells Pardot what to present when someone's either doing the completion action or the engagement studio program. Now, what I can do is I can say, I don't want to ask the marketer to give me that prospect ID because I have the default set to that HTML merge variable. I can just remove it here entirely. I can mark fields as required if I want. I'm not going to do that. I'm already pushing the off script demo here as enough as it is. So we're going to submit this as it is. And what I should see in Pardot, if I configure the external action, is the max and min controls. All right, we're going to hit save. It might take a minute for this to sync over to Pardot. This isn't as fast, but once these are set up, typically you don't make any changes. Now, if we wanted to set a new one up, let's say we wanted to handle a form submission, right? First, we would make that auto-launched flow where we create the form submission record. We have 5 or 6 input variables, whatever we want for that form submission. Then we would come to this marketing app extensions, either create or look at an existing one, and I would hit new, and I would go to stamp form submission, put in your nice little description here. And this is where you can pick the invocable action. Now, I always recommend to have those auto-launched flows, so you can go to the flow debugger or flow designer and debug it. There's a lot of ways you can test it. But if you're feeling adventurous, you can actually call some of the Apex invocable actions directly, which can be helpful if you are working with a third-party app or things like that. So I didn't create the flow for this stamping submission example because I thought I'd have a little bit more time. But same thing. You pick your flow, the schema gets populated, you can make whatever tweaks you want. All right, so assuming I didn't mess something up, I'm going to go back to our form. I'm going to see if this works the second time. Going into the completion actions. Now, because I made changes, right, Pardot's actually telling me that things have changed. And now I have the maximum and the minimum. So I'm going to go with a maximum of 100, minimum of, 5. We're going to hit save. All right, now I'm going to go to this form again. I'm going to go in a different window so I'm not already cookied. I'm going to go with the bear 2. And my comments, please work this time. All right. So with that submitted, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're going to come to our prospects. We're going to take a look at Cody the Bear too, and it didn't work. So I'm going to pretend that was planned and quickly show how you can take a look at what errors might exist. So in Pardot settings, you can go to external action errors, and it will show you, there's an error. We couldn't invoke the flow, and it'll give you, the input parameter of prospect ID can't accept string. Right, so this is just a little bit of a configuration issue. I can go into this schema, that JSON schema, and make changes to get this kind of thing working again. All right, so with a couple of failed demos, Gene's happy, and we're gonna start wrapping this up. So when you're working with external actions, right, always use those auto launched flows. It gives you that ability to test. When you're working with your input variables, take in that text value and then convert it with a formula. It's not really something that we showed in the demo today, right? But if you want to use an HTML merge variable, you have to have it as a string, and it passes it all the way through. Once it gets to the flow as text, you can convert it to a number, you can convert it to a date. There's lots of formula functions for enabling that. And then the last tip I have is, always keep in mind the marketer who's going to use your external action, right? And remove and take away or remove some of those view components wherever possible, right? So like recipient ID or Salesforce CRM ID. The marketer doesn't need to type in that HTML merge thing. So just provide that as a default value, hide it from the screen so that the marketer can focus on giving you the inputs that might be different from one form to another. If you want to dig into some additional resources, Salesforce Ben has a couple of different pretty good articles, and the spot for Pardot has a few different articles on external actions. They are a little bit dated, but most of the information is still pretty accurate. And then there's a link to this presentation itself too. So thank you so much, and thanks for putting up with my couple of failed demos. I might record a different video and share it one day where those actually work. So I don't know if there's any people who have questions. Pop off of mute if that's even allowed here. I don't know. What's up?
Yeah, no, people can't pop off mute, but there's been a lot of questions in chat. Justin said I could use an 8-hour workshop on this, which is legitimate. I mean, it's not it's a pretty in-depth topic, and it's kind of like peeling an onion. You understand one part of it, and then you're like, oh, there's another part of it. Oh, everything's kind of daisy chained together a bit. So, but this was super helpful and super in depth. Would be happy to have you come back if you want to do another session, more go even deeper on it. Let me see what's in the chat here. This was a great exposure. Can we host a follow-up? Yes. I mean, as long as he's willing to do it. Matt, yes, there's a recording of this. It's been recording, and I'll send out a recording to everybody who registered, and then it'll also go up online. But yeah, external actions are great, and they're very powerful, but they're also not super well understood. That's my kind of impression, is that it can do a lot, but this is one of those areas where if you have a admin developer, somebody who has some more experience and comfortability with the more like code side of Salesforce, if you as a Pardot admin have somebody who you can kind of partner with on this, then you've got there's a lot that you can do. If you don't, it's a little more challenging, but it would also then behoove you to try to become more skilled in the more code side of Salesforce to be more self-reliant. There are resources like Adam said, the spot for Pardot, Salesforce Ben. I want to say that others, I think Bill Fetter probably has a blog post. Jen Case, and I'm probably sure has written about it as well. But yeah, obviously here we've got the presentation here, and so I'll include a link to the presentation in the email that I send to people. It'll also be on the event wrap up. So if you want to see that there, you can as well. But yeah, no, this was super helpful. I greatly appreciate you coming back, Adam. And looks like Krista's going to bring it back to the dev team, which is awesome. So yeah, if you want to come back, if there's something else that you feel, if there's a take on this, another additional use cases or functionality, you open invitation if you want to come back anytime. Sure. Certainly people want to hear about it and learn about it. So so yeah, thanks so much everybody for joining. Thanks, Adam. And this will be up on this will be posted probably in the next few days. And the next session we have, I am hosting it. It's on building, it's kind of how to build quick and dirty title normalization in Pardot using automations. That's something that's an issue that often comes up, and I've done it a couple times. So check the community group for that. I want to say it's next week. It might be the week after. I need to check again, but yeah, thanks so much everybody, and thank you for joining. And yeah, we will see you next time. Thanks again, Adam. Everyone have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.